All right, so this is part two of our basically learning about Vaue. Once again, is Vaue is kind of the study of how light affects objects and the shadows that's created. And we did a couple of things last time. We did a Vaue scale on the last page. We did hatching and cross hatching. So we left off with down here where it says scribbles and squiggles. We're going to change the name of that to what's called scumbling. So I'll try to write it larger for you so you can see it. Okay. So we're going to get a little bit of practice, and on the back of your paper, I'm just going to flip it over. So basically what scumbling is, just like a controlled scribble. Okay, so with your pencil, you're not doing like loop-de-loos or anything like that. You shouldn't have a distinct mark to it like that. It's basically just a controlled scribble. So you're kind of allowing the pencil to go sort of in random areas. It's very free-flowing, very organic. And the more you overlap over it again and again, sort of the darker it gets. And as if you do it lighter, it's spaced on further apart, you get sort of a lighter scumble, okay? So pause the video, take a few minutes, practice doing that, and then following back to the other side, we're going to create a Vaue scale. Okay? All right, so getting back, we have our Vaue scale for scumbling. So we're going to start out dark. So once again, it's basically just random sort of marks that sort of overlap one another. If you're seeing like a tangled piece of string, it's sort of like that too. So we have our darkest dark here, lightest light over here. And so, keep on combining, overlapping until you think if you got your darkest dark. So there's very little white spaces left behind, okay? And it's very light. Okay, something like that. So that's my darkest dark. So I want both extremes like we've been doing before. And so for here, I'm going to be doing my lightest light. So the pencil is barely touching the paper. It's barely evident that it's there. And like something like that. I'm not sure you can see that on the camera or not, but it's very, very light. So now we got to figure out the in-betweens. We actually numbered these last time. This is a fresh page, so I don't have that. But I did 1 through 6. Yeah, so 2 through 5, we want to get increasingly lighter as we step down the scale. Okay, so start with the same procedure. I always lay down a nice base for myself and allow myself to build so I'm not going too dark and having to erase and go back in. Okay, so it's something like this. You're always comparing and contrasting, asking yourself, is it a huge step forward or is it a very, very gradual step? I want a very gradual step. This is too much of a difference here, so I would keep going. Okay, and something like that. Okay, so last video I looked at two different things called hatching and cross hatching, right? So hatching was just lines next to each other. The closer they are, the darker they appear, the more intense the pencil pressure. Same with cross hatch. They're intersecting the hatching lines. And the darker is a more heavier pressure of the pencil plus more lines intersecting. Okay, so we're going to use these two ideas when we jump into our shapes. We've done these three-dimensional forms in class. You guys remember we had this sort of ellipse, okay? And that was basically to mostly point out this is a circular edge, right? We're keeping that in mind first and foremost, okay? Before we jump into the actual mark making, we need to identify a light source. So in all of these, we're going to keep a light source on the upper left. So you kind of just draw a little sun right there for yourself. It indicates the light's going to be shining down from this right here, this light source. So the left-hand side is going to be sort of a highlight. The right-hand side is not receiving as much light as the light travels around the surface of this form. It will be more in shadow, and as it gets closer to the light source, it becomes lighter and lighter and lighter to finally a white space, which we would call a highlight, okay? So we're going to use hatching and cross-hatching. So keep in mind this curved surface. So when I do my hatch lines, usually what I do, I lay out what's called a base. So try to make this thing as natural looking as possible. So it's not very obviously like these very distinct lines, but they're going to sort of flow into each other. We did the idea of gradation. Even though we're using hatching lines, we can still get a nice smooth transition from dark to light. We're using these hatching lines, okay? So notice all my lines are curved, going parallel to the curve of this top, the curve at the bottom, okay? As I mentioned before too, I'll have my base. This furthest right hand side is going to be the darkest, right? So now I can use more pencil pressure sort of to get the lines in darker, sort of along the side here. And right now I'm left with like sort of a strip of dark and a strip of light. So our job is to sort of blend those two together. So by kind of coming in, like allow these darker lines to start to blend into the lighter lines. Okay. I could probably even go darker a little bit on the side here. So I've got it pretty good now. It's starting to look more natural. It's blended, okay? So now I can start with my cross hatching. So I don't have to curve these lines coming down because we're looking at the parallel from the straight edge, okay? So the cross hatch is going to be concentrated more so on the right-hand side versus the left-hand side. So I'm just not always going from top to bottom. I can do ones that go halfway up, ones that are lighter, or more spaced apart. Kind of shows us a lighter value, okay? And those should sort of blend in as well. Okay, last but not least, we got a little bit of shading on the top. This is going to be really bright over here. It starts to get a little more shadowed, but it's still a very, very light shadow. So I'm going to throw some horizontal hatch marks on there too. And last but not least, we have our cast shadow. So the cast shadow is a shadow that's being cast from the object itself. And it's typically like it takes on the shape of the object here it's casting from. So that can just be drawn out sort of like a cylinder and then shaded in like this. So that is the cylinder. We're going to move on to the cone, okay? So very similar to the cylinder, the cone has a circular bottom to it, okay? And we have a light source still left-hand side that's sort of shining down on my cone. There are some differences, so just watch when we add the cross contours in. So once again, our hatch lines, we're going to lay down a nice base for ourselves, a very light hatch marks to go out, that kind of go out towards the middle here. And then from the right hand side, once again, we're going to add some darker hatching lines. Okay. And we're going to add in cross hatching. So this time, we're thinking about this point, right? I'm thinking about the hands on a clock, so this sort of rotates around in this direction. So when we do our cross hatching, it's not just straight up like this. You've got to sort of go by the point of this coming down, okay? So go here. See how I'm rotating the paper? Sort of makes things a little easier. hitting that tip up here. Okay, so that is the cone. We're gonna move up to the sphere. And you kind of mentioned like a person working might have different tools in his toolbox like screwdrivers, hammers, things like that. We also have different tools. We have cross hatching, we have scumbling. So scumbling works much better on a sphere here. So once again, we can have a light source. Our light source is getting pretty much concentrated right here. And this area is sort of circular because of the overall three-dimensional qualities that this sphere has. We're going to start with a base. So that can just be a nice light scumble that sort of flows into that highlighted area. So we're not going too dark yet. Okay, once you have the nice base for yourself, you're going to start in the bottom, and it's going to be a darker concentration here. And so as you think about the value scale, dark, medium, light, highlight. Okay, so you gotta kind of keep going back and forth until you get something that sort of merges into each other with those different values. Okay.